June 28, 1914, the Archduke Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary is assassinated. This leads to a chain of events that will bring us to a great war. The armies are starting to mass, the sides are beginning to take shape. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy form the Triple Alliance, while Great Britain, France, and Russia form the Triple Entente. Many things will change in this world after the war. The Kaiser will be deposed and in exile. There will be a revolution in Russia, and the Tsar and his family will be assassinated. And the King of Britain will be the ruler of what's now described as a broken and debt-ridden empire. And on the other side of the world, the Albernis are feeling the effects. Today I'm privileged to talk with Jamie Morton, manager of the Alberni Valley Museum. We're discussing the Great War and its effects on the Alberni Valley. What effects did that war have?
Well, it got everybody excited. The initial thing was really the Great Adventure. A lot of the people in the valley had arrived fairly recently. There had been a massive boom in the period from 1900 through 1912. It collapsed a little bit in 1913, but there were a lot of young guys here, both people that had come in with families, people that had come in as individuals just looking for work in industry, looking for the adventure of the new world. And when war broke out, people wanted to sign up. It was seen as a great adventure. It was seen as something that appealed to young men in particular. And these young men in this period had been raised on boys' own stories, the idea of adventure in exotic places in the British Empire, fighting against cruel antagonists, challenging nature, and a lot of these young guys were looking for that kind of challenge. It was the same kind of imperative that brought them to Canada and to Vancouver Island and to the Albernis, and it was something that attracted them to the war as the great adventure. Remember in 1914 when it broke out, everybody said the war would be over by December, over by Christmas, home by Christmas. So they all saw this as a great thing to be involved in. It was also patriotism, because the majority of these people were from within the British Empire. A lot of them were from Britain itself, a lot from Eastern Canada, had strong ties, sometimes direct, sometimes indirect. So they all wanted to contribute to the process of empire and keeping empire safe.
And what about some of the women? I believe there was a lot of home front effort too, wasn't there?
There was a certain amount of that, yeah, because almost everybody in the valley had some kind of impact from the war. Again, about 160 people signed up by the fall of 1914 into early 1915. And when you have about 1,600 people in the region, pretty much every family was touched in one way or another. Somebody that they knew, a neighbor, or somebody in their family. A lot of young men that had been raised here ended up going off to war. And part of what they tried to do, the whole patriotic thing, was to have women contribute in their own way to that. They knit socks. We've got a program at the museum right now where we've got them knitting socks in the style of World War I. They offered food and so forth that could be shipped off to the trenches to the young men. So yeah, everybody tried to contribute in the way that they could. Interestingly, it's also when women got the vote for the first time in British Columbia in 1917. And this was directly as a result of the war. It's also why temperance was kicked in, because nobody wanted to be spending their money and their energy on getting drunk when they should be working on the war effort. By the time the war broke out, the region was already in sort of a mini depression, and the boom that had occurred through 1912, 1913 had ended. So again, a lot of these young men were kind of at loose ends, and they were looking for something to do. This is what made the adventure of signing up and going and fighting in a war even more attractive to them. On the other hand, when they came back, there was a little bit of a depression again, and a lot of them had trouble finding work after the war. They also came back and found that things were dry, as we just talked about with Prohibition, and that ended fairly quickly in Canada because none of the veterans thought that the veterans felt that they should be able to go out and get a drink after they had fought for their country.
We're back at the museum again, this time with Shelley Harding. You had some of the local ADSS students researching some of our World War I veterans.
Yes, we did. We worked with the grade 12 civilizations class from the high school, and they were here for mostly throughout the fall doing this research, which culminated in an exhibit.
That's excellent. And how did it affect some of these students? A lot of the men going off to war at that time were probably close to the same age as the students doing the research.
Well, that's one of the things we talked about when we first started with the program on their very first day here. We were talking about the general aspects of the First World War and put it at their level that, you know, this would be them making these decisions at that very same age, that these people were making a decision to enlist in the services, or they would be losing, you know, brothers, boyfriends, fathers, uncles, as those folks left to fight in the war. They were affected quite a lot throughout. It was a really incredible learning experience and a real honor to be working with these students as they worked their way through this. They started to take an ownership of some of the soldiers that they were researching, and then it was quite emotional at times when they realized that the person they were researching didn't come home.
Yeah, I'm sure that would become very emotional. And I'm sure there are a few that stand out.
A few of the stories?
A few of the stories, a few of the soldiers who did stand out.
Oh, absolutely. Charles Bonnell was in the Scottish Fusiliers, I believe, and he wrote this remarkable little book of poems that we have here in the archives.
My pen goes back to my ink-splashed rack, for this is no time to write. For words must cease till time's of peace, 'tis deeds, not words, tonight. And if 'tis willed, my voice be stilled. Oh, earth is a kindly place, with its ups and downs, its smiles and frowns, when I win or lose the race. If some small word from my lips was heard, or thought by my pen was writ, that was worth the while or raised a smile, I should feel I've done my bit. Charles Samuel Bannell, April 1917, written just before leaving Canada.
One of the soldiers that we talked a lot about and we did find a lot of information about was George Bird Jr. His father owned the Bird sawmill and was an early pioneer to the Alberni Valley, and there was a lot of information on George Bird Jr.'s early days growing up here in the valley, going to school in Port Alberni. He actually attended the very first school that took place. It was a classroom that took place in the basement of the Watsons building on Argyle Street, involved in sports, involved in the community. So they were able to follow his whole entire early life, and then follow his journey when he enlisted in the Army in 1915 and was involved in Vimy Ridge and some of the earlier significant battles of the war, and he died of injuries in June 1917. So he was one that they were all quite taken with, this young man, and looking at his family pictures in our photo collection, and then discovering that he didn't come home. And knowing that Bird Street is, there's still reference to that family here.
At the outbreak of war, many young men answered the call of duty, including 3 young brothers who would become affectionately known as the Redford Boys. They are the oldest sons of James Redford, a local farmer. The 3 brothers left for Victoria in November of 1914 and signed up with the 88th Fusiliers. They were soon merged with the 30th Battalion, which is a reserve unit. After that, they were transferred to the 7th Battalion, and the 7th is on the front. At 29, Edward is the oldest of the brothers, but after 9 months of service on the front lines, he is severely wounded. But it is not from combat. There's been a tragic accident. What has happened is Edward and 2 other soldiers found a non-exploded German shell which they thought would make a great souvenir. Getting the shell and cleaning it up, the shell explodes, killing his 2 companions and severely wounding Edward. The wounds are serious enough to send him home, and by March of 1917, Edward is back in the Alberni Valley. Fate is going to be less kind to Douglas, who is only 20 years old. While serving on the front lines, he is listed as missing in action, but later on, it's found he has been killed in action. At 19 years of age, William is the youngest of the brothers. He is soon wounded in combat, though, and sent home. By November of 1916, he is the first of the brothers to come home. The war took its toll on these 3 young men and their family, as it did with many other families in the valley. These men sacrificed their health and their lives while answering the call of duty. Oh, you seem to have quite a cart full of goodies for us.
So much of the museum, we don't want to get the oils of our hands onto the artifacts because eventually that will deteriorate them. But this is a selection of things from the Canadian War Museum, and they're all touchable, so we're allowed to touch them and handle them and see what's going on. This is a gas rattle. It's really loud, but you want to give it a little spin?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
They would have used that in the trenches. That's to let them know that there's a gas and they need to put their gas masks on. And it was used mostly for an alarm, but it's made of wood. And in the trenches, there wasn't a lot of wood. So a few of these would go missing, and they think they just used them as kindling to make themselves a hot cup of tea.
Well, that's one solution for tea.
There's all sorts of fun pieces in here. This one is an aviator's scarf. So it's always heard of sort of the World War I aces. That's sort of the scarf that they would wear. Quite soft, if you want to feel that.
Sure.
All sorts of different pieces here. This one is a nurse's uniform, her apron. And I had it on the other day, and I needed help getting out of it. It has so many buttons. It's not something you could dress yourself in. I'm sure for them it was quite common and simple, but for us today with Velcro and elastic, it's a little harder.
Yes.
Trench art was very popular. This is made from a shell, right? And then they've decorated it. Some of the men would find the shelves and make their own, carve things into it. We have one upstairs in our own collection that a former mayor made, but also they were made as souvenirs for the soldiers. So over there, the metalsmiths would use the old pieces of, this is a piece of shrapnel, a casing that was used as part of the war, but they've decorated up, and then they would have sold it for the soldiers to bring home.
It's quite a fine piece of artwork. Quite
There's some
intricate.
very interesting pieces, and you'll find there's a number of pieces here in this exhibit from the Royal British Columbia Museum, and also one upstairs in our own collection that's here all the time. There is a piece of barbed wire here. So that's what they would have faced. World War I trench warfare, there was all sort of the trenches and then the layers of barbed wire, and that's just sort of a sample of what they would have been up against. Now, in this case behind us, there's a couple helmets. So in this uniform, at the beginning of the war, they started out with this one at the back, and that was found not to be suitable for trench warfare. So they replaced it with this beret here. And it wasn't until 1915 that they started wearing hard shell helmets like that.
So we're pretty much a year into the war before we get.
Right, and at the beginning, it was just those on the front lines because they didn't make them fast enough.
And that is not comfortable. Definitely, I prefer my hat. Many local families have boxes of souvenirs and mementos from the Great War, but the best mementos are the letters and postcards from home.
April 23rd, 1918. My dearest Cyril, I have just received 2 long letters from you and will answer them tomorrow. But I am just as lonely as you, dear, but better and happier times in the future, I hope. I write twice a week to you, darling Cyril, so you should get them more regular. So good night, dearest, and lots of love and heaps of kisses.
That postcard was written to a young Cyril Woodward from a young lady named Gladys.
I was looking through all these papers and found these postcards of, well, first the postcards that Pop had bought when he was in England to show the family. And then I found these ones from Gladys, and it was always, love Gladys. And I had never heard of a Gladys in the family, and I knew that he married Mamie shortly after the war, so I was kind of baffled by this Gladys. And she didn't become part of Cyril's life when I was born and found out about Cyril. I never met a Gladys, but there was a Gladys back there somewhere.
Turns out Gladys was most likely a cousin, letting Cyril know that he is not forgotten at home. After all, Cyril is just a boy.
He signed up in 1915. I guess the people in Victoria were starting up the 103rd Expeditionary Force, the Vancouver Island Timberwolves. There was lots of advertising, and young men were wanting to join up and go over to England and fight and help the motherland. So he signed up, much to his father's dismay. He actually wrote a letter to the army to say that his son was only 15 and that he didn't think he should be going overseas. But Cyril did get shipped overseas in 1916 with the rest of the 103rd and landed in England and worked as a soldier in England, trained. But they did find out his age, and he was relegated to medical corps. So he didn't get to go over to France to fight. He was very adventuresome and never shied away from anything different or out of the ordinary. He was a bit of a loner, and he was always outdoorsman. He loved the outdoors. Pop was one of the founding members of the Alberni Legion and worked with the Legion, active with the Legion all his life. And so it was driven home about Remembrance Day and to remember, honor the people that made this country free.
In 1997, at the age of 97, Cyril loses his final battle, 82 years after he first enlisted.
Largely what we try and do with respect to World War I or World War II or other events like this is to collect people's memories about them, to collect images, and to collect objects that somehow symbolize or reflect what they were involved in. With a wartime experience, it's interesting with something like World War I, because people tend to bring things back with them. They bring back souvenirs, things like shell art, things like bayonets, things like uniforms, things that they save as keepsakes or mementos of their own experience in the war. In some cases, people wrote letters or postcards back and forth, letting their families know or letting their friends or spouses know what they were doing while they were away. One of the things that's neat is that a lot of people collect this in a family, but then it kind of gets forgotten about. And what we'd like to encourage in a museum is the idea of collective memory, the idea that we can act as a repository for some of these kinds of materials, and then have it there for the whole community so they can see what people valued, what they treasured, what they thought symbolized their experiences. And it makes those experiences more real in many cases. It's possible in some cases to track the people and talk to the people that were involved in these things, but not always. We sometimes have to piece it together from a lot of different sources. So between photos and paper records and objects, we can figure out a little bit what life was like for these people, both through the wartime experience in Port Alberni or Alberni itself, or for the guys that went off to the front or were involved in merchant marine during the war. A lot of different experiences pulled together with the things that they leave behind. So it's a legacy, really, of their experiences.
And do you think we really learned from all this? Because in a generation, we come into another war.
We hope that people learn something from it. Now, we are planning on doing another community exhibit that deals with the local experience in World War II. And what we'd like to find out more about is what people's lives were like in the Alberni Valley during World War II. Now, it affected the local community much, much more than World War I did, in that there was a home front set up, in that there was an army camp, the Pacific Coast Rangers, the internment of the Japanese residents of the Alberni Valley. And what we're hoping to do is to elicit more community input. So what I was talking about with collective memory is we're hoping that there's people out there that still remember some of the events of World War II in the Alberni Valley, that maybe still have some of the keepsakes from their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents from that era, maybe have some photographs, maybe have some letters and notes about what was going on here at the time. Because we want to keep on trying to educate people as to the impact of war on a region like the Albernis.
Thank you, Jamie. Whether you believe we learned from this experience or we never learned, by the end of 1939, the world is once again at war. If you'd like to know more about your family's involvement or your community's involvement, drop by your local museum. They're always here to help. I'm Gerald Labute, your local time traveler, and we'll see you next time, whatever time that may be.